Hello and welcome to episode 2 of It's Personal, the podcast which explores how to put the citizen at the heart of public service design. I'm Jess, the editor of Civil Service World.
And I'm Jo, partner at KPMG, focusing on customer transformation.
We've got a great episode for you today, an interview with the DWP's Matt Briggs, the senior responsible owner for the Department for Work and Pensions' Service Modernisation programme. Basically, his job is to help drag government services into the 21st century.
Matt grew up in East London, in a community where lots of people really struggled, and he saw firsthand the power of the benefit system. Because of this, the DWP felt like a natural choice when he was considering his career. Ever since, his decades-long journey through the civil service has been shaped by a deep belief in the power of public service done well.
We caught up with Matt in May to chat about everything from leading national projects like Tell Us Once to wrestling with imposter syndrome and how the personal stories of individual citizens are what gets him out of bed in the morning. Let's dive in. So, Matt, thank you so much for joining us here on It's Personal. I wanted to start by asking you a little bit about your background and your career. How did you get here?
How did I get here? Born in the East End of London in the 70s, high unemployment, high inflation, community breakdown. I applied to join the civil service. The only bit of the civil service I knew was the benefit system because that was the family that I came from. So I said I'd go work there. And I've been there for 34 years and have loved every minute. I've done operational jobs and change jobs and policy jobs. But right now I am leading the department's service modernisation programme.
Amazing. And I read somewhere that someone asked you, what would you be doing if you weren't a civil servant? And you said that people often tell you that you would be a used car salesman, which is it. And you weren't sure whether that was a compliment.
I probably think that's probably not the best compliment in the world, but I think it's sort of my...
Why do you think they say that?
I think there's a bit of East End accent.
Right, yes.
I think there's a stereotype, but I like to talk. I'm an extrovert, and that's partly comes from being dyslexic, so I don't like writing. Actually, being an extrovert and talking to people is what I like, and everyone goes, well, you be quite good at selling things then.
I was actually going to ask you about your dyslexia because you described it as a strength, and you said that not everyone regards it that way, but how is it a strength for you?
I think there's sort of 4 things that I've always sort of reflected on with my dyslexia. One is I was diagnosed quite late, and therefore I went through all of my schooling and early education not knowing I was dyslexic and just thought I actually just had to work hard to just keep up. So there's a sort of work ethic that comes from it. As a consequence, I sort of drew a lot rather than wrote a lot. So I'm quite visual in my leadership style, and in a world of PowerPoint, that seems to be quite a good thing.
Yeah.
And actually, by having that sort of mindset, you sort of become slightly a systems thinker. You want to sort of understand the big picture and how you might fit within it to help you tell stories and help you to do the visualization of things. So that sort of systems thinking has probably helped a lot as well.
So 34-year career in the civil service. You don't look old enough to have worked that long in the civil service, by the way, but you must have faced a lot of different challenges over the years. What was kind of your worst period?
To be honest, I've loved almost every minute of it because actually the challenge is part of public service and actually it's great to do that. So I was involved in a policy programme which was the introduction of personal independence payment and came into that quite late at a point in time where there were quite significant backlogs within that service. And I was asked to come up with a plan to how do you get yourself out of that. And ministers announcing in the House that it will all be sorted by Christmas. And you're sitting there going, I don't know how we're going to do that. And they've been quite challenging. But what I've noticed in those situations is how everyone rallies around. There is a real ethos of service and pulling together in those crisis moments. So whilst they're quite stressful, keep you awake at night type moments, they've actually been a bit ones that I've built the strongest relationships.
Yeah, that kind of trench, you're in the trenches together.
And it's been really, some of it you look back on and you go, actually, that was quite enjoyable. It wasn't when you was in it. But looking back and going, actually, I learned so much through doing that.
Yeah, there's so much talk about how can we kind of bottle that crisis spirit, and just apply it in everyday life in the civil service.
I'm not sure I'd want to go through it all the time.
So We talked about challenges. What's been your proudest moment as a civil servant, or some career highlights?
There's 3 moments that I just keep looking back on and going, those are things that have really stood by me. The first is almost when I first joined the department, I worked on something called Social Fund, which was for the most vulnerable people who had run out of money and they needed something. And a young lady came in with 2 children. She was a lone mother and her fridge had broken.
Yeah.
And I went with her to go and buy her a new fridge. And the look of delight on her face of actually being able to put cold food in that fridge to feed her kids.
With money from the fund.
Money from the fund.
Yeah.
And it was just such a moment of going, this is why we do what we do in the public service. This is the people that we're really trying to serve. And it's just stuck with me. Her name was Tina, and this was 33 years ago.
Wow.
And I still remember that moment of, this is why I do this. The second is I was the programme manager of something called Tell Us Once, which if anyone has been through a bereavement, it is the service where you can actually report that bereavement to multiple parts of government and public services and local authorities all together. And my bits there has always been when people have written in and saying, you don't know what a difference that you've made during that really vulnerable time in my life, and being slightly distant from it because you was doing the programme management and getting someone actually writing to you.
I'm welling up a bit
there
now.
is just one of those moments that you're going, oh my God, this is sort of fantastic. So those are sort of 2 what I would call people bits that relate to customers. And then the third is sort of being actually asked to do the service modernisation programme. So there's something, there's a personal pride that someone's recognised, and that's something I constantly look out for as a leader, is who are the people that you want to recognise and give them the support. So happening to me, it felt like a really fantastic thing. And then how do you play that back to others?
Yeah. Just to say, I was talking to my mum recently about you and Tell Us Once, and she said that service, when my dad passed away, that service didn't exist. But by the time my grandparents did, it had come into force.
Yeah.
And it made such a difference to her. And so I suppose it's a personal thank you from me and my mum for bringing that in. Okay, so you talked about the tap on the shoulder to come and lead service modernisation. Can you tell us a bit more about that? And obviously this podcast is all about designing services around citizen needs. So how are you taking citizens' needs and preferences into account as you modernise DWP services?
I think there's sort of 4 principles that I'm holding. Who are our customers, and can we just remember who they are? Over 30% of our customers claim more than one benefit, and we ask them to go through that time and time again, provide the same information over and over again. We should just be able to remember who they are and engage with them in that way. And the second is when they do claim multiple things, one of them you have to claim on paper, one you might do over the phone, and one might be online. There is not a joined up experience for that person. So there's a sort of, how do you make it easy for people? So the second bit is doing it around them and their needs and making it easy for them to do it. The third is sort of, if you're doing it over the phone or you're going into an office, you can only do that between 9 and 5.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's be available at the time that they want to do things. Is that at the weekend? Is that late in the evening? Some of these people live incredibly complex lives. So forcing them to go, no, actually you're going to drop all of these other things between 9 and 5 and come and do what we want you to do. Let's make ourselves available. That means you have to be digital.
Mm-hmm.
And then the world is changing quite dramatically. So how do you actually become an organisation that can respond to those things? So when the journey started, it was, how do you put things onto a computer? Well, now it's all about how do you put things onto your phone.
Yeah.
It was all about, let's try and make the forms as easy as possible. Now you've got AI, you don't even need forms at all. So that actually, how do you keep evolving what you're doing and creating the capabilities to actually do that?
Can you say a bit more about not needing forms? How do you mean?
So we need information off of customers to actually determine whether they're eligible to a benefit, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to write down a 48-page form of give us all of the bits of information. If you do it online, have a form that might be a bit more intuitive. actually, you could have more of a discussion like we are here. We could have a conversation, and out of that, I could elicit the information that I need. Well, why can't you do that with AI?
So like a chatbot?
Yeah.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah.
That would actually be much more pleasurable than filling in a form.
Yeah,
Just
and a
having
lot of
having a chat with even if it is with a robot.
yeah, and a lot of what the information we're asking, in particular if you're going through a health journey, is a bit more about describe something. We're actually putting it in a form and saying you can only use 100 words in that
100
form,
characters.
100 characters. That's not the way
Yeah.
the world is at the moment,
Yeah.
and we have to be able to respond to those sorts of things.
And change is the only constant, I think, is the phrase. And obviously, all departments are in a constant process of transformation. But in terms of making it the best it can be at the moment for citizens in 2025, what are the key milestones you've achieved? How far have you still got to go?
So I would say we're a third through that journey. And the reason for that is I've sort of blocked it in 3 blocks and we're coming towards the end of that first block. So the first block was all about how do we get the data organised in a way that enables us to be able to join up the services around their needs. So actually that did mean putting stuff just online quite quickly to enable the data to be structured in a certain way there. And some really great things have come out of that. We have now supporting 1.3 million people through an online child maintenance service. 80% of all claims to state pension are now done online with straight-through processing that sits behind all of that. So all of that, getting all of that data about those people and going, actually, who are the people? How can we organise our work differently? We're coming to the end of just sort of what I'd call the automation phase. The second phase is all about how do you then start to join those things together. So we're just about to start, for example, bringing state pension credit and attendance allowance together.
What is attendance allowance?
So it's for people over the state pension age who have health conditions, but not enough have a health condition that means it needs to be in full-time care. And that's predominantly people usually about the age of 75 to 80 who get that. But obviously there's people of different ages. So bringing those 3 things together, so that both is the operations. So we've got a test going on in Swansea at the moment of how to get people who were just trained to do state pensions processing to also understand what pension credit is and attendance allowance is, so they can support a much more rounded experience for someone who's in later life. Then building the technology that sort of links and supports that together. So we're just starting that journey of joining up, and we've decided that clusters is the way to go around sort of people's broad characteristics. So one around later life, one around children, and one around carers. So how do we build those clusters of services to actually support them? So that's the second phase that we'll be going into. And then the third phase is what I'd call the how do we become an optimised service? So are we organising the back of house activities in the right way to support those front of house?
Sounds like a theatre.
So it probably is. Yeah, it's people who are working.
Or a restaurant.
So the ushers supporting those people who are on the stage through it in the right way possible. And there will be like, how do we organise ourselves much more effectively to be an optimal way of doing that?
What's great about civil servants of your ilk is, and I mean this in the best possible way, it sounds like you're not going anywhere. You get so much churn and movement around departments, but you're a DWP guy through and through, and it sounds to me like you're going to be one of those leaders who just sees the project through rather than jumping around between different organisations. And there's a lot to be said for that. But, you know, the idea of a senior responsible owner or officer is to stick around and see it through, really. And it seems to me like that's what you've done with previous programmes, that's what you're going to do with this.
Absolutely. I think there's sort of, firstly, let's not decry people who come in from outside. We need new skills, new capabilities, new thinking. There are some fantastic people in our programme who go like, why do we do this? Why can't we do it that way? The same outcome. So you need a balance.
Absolutely.
There. I think then there is sort of 2 reasons why people who have a history within an organisation there. One is sort of your point around understanding the environments, the institutional knowledge, what the processes are, how you get things done inside that culture. That's really important. But usually people hang around because they love the purpose. And the reason that I'm there is because I love what we do and the support that we actually give to our customers. So actually that passion has to be one of the things that flows through in how you actually deal with change.
You mentioned Tina, but is there another kind of citizen whose story kind of gets you out of bed in the morning?
My spirit animal, the thing that I keep judging whether our programme is actually going to support someone's life, is someone I met 9 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
His situation is very unusual. His name's Brian. Brian is the middle of a 5-generation family. So it's a very unusual situation. So that in itself is unusual.
Yeah.
But the interactions that he has are not unusual. And we shouldn't go, oh, because he's in the middle of a 5-generation family, it just doesn't apply to anyone else. But the reason he's my sort of spirit animal is because if we can solve his needs, we basically solve everyone's. So he is part-time working. His wife's part-time working. And so therefore, how do we enable him to get better work, more pay, doesn't rely on universal credit?
Mm-hmm.
So how do we support him doing that? Well, one of the reasons he's part-time is because of the other 4 generations in his family, and he's spending a lot of time supporting them. He's got a mother who is just coming up to state pension age, but she's just been diagnosed with onset dementia. Well, it was 9 months ago. I've kept in touch with him. It's got worse, unfortunately. So he's supporting his mother. His grandmother is in care. And her income through, she sold her house about 20 years ago. That's now coming to an end. And therefore, what support can his grandmother get from the state, whether that's from local authorities or from the Department for Work and Pensions? So he's having to deal with all of that activity. He's got a daughter who was not married.
Mm-hmm.
She's a lone parent. And therefore isn't working at the moment. And one of the reasons she's not working is she's got a child who's disabled. So that is someone who would be entitled to disability living allowance for children, would need support with child maintenance through it. So it's an unusual set of circumstances for one person to have to deal with. Each individual component of that is not unusual.
Yeah.
And he says to us, or said to me, and keeps saying to me is, can you just remember who I am? That would be a good thing. How many times I have to tell you who I am and prove who I am is unbelievable. So can you just remember who I am? Second is, can you just make my life a little bit easier? I have to fill in a form for this, I fill in a form for that. I have to ring up for this. I have to do all of that. So can you just do that? And then the third thing he says, can you just be around when I'm around? So I'm part-time working. I'm having to go off to the hospital to see my grandmother. I'm having to try and get a doctor's appointment for my mum.
Yep.
I'm trying to pick the child up from a school. She's disabled, and trying to support my daughter who's trying to find work. Doing all of that, and then you expect me to do all of this other work when you're open, but not when I'm got time.
Yeah, and am I right in thinking you met him on holiday, when you were on holiday?
Yeah, and he was
supposed to be relaxing, not thinking about work, presumably.
He was talking about why he was on holiday and needed a break from all of those things. And I have to be honest, it took me about 4 days to actually admit that I could probably do something about that. Mainly, I think part of that was I don't want to ruin his holiday and make him just keep talking about all of these things. But then there was a sort of point of, well, actually, you've got to stand up and go, no, actually, I am accountable for doing those things. So we've stayed in touch. Great in terms of a relationship and a friendship, but he's the person that I'm sitting there judging whether we're going to be successful or not.
So obviously we are in an era of belt tightening at the moment. We're recording this before the spending review has come out, but the general vibes, efficiency across government, cutting budgets where possible. How is DWP achieving cost efficiency while also meeting
I think two
citizen
main
needs?
things. One is actually a lot of our costs come from how many people we have to serve. But actually, if we can actually get people back into work, so where our investment is how do you support people get into work? That means we have to deal with less customers. That makes us cheaper and it's better for them. So actually reducing the volume of people going through quite an intensive process by getting them back into work is just our primary aim as a department. The second is a lot of our costs come from what I would describe as inefficient processes that we've historically built over time. And therefore, programs like mine is, well, we are fundamentally changing the customer experience. But the consequence of that is that we get rid of the failure demand. Journeys will be shorter, so people don't ring us up chasing inquiries. We don't ask them to contact us 5 times, only need to contact us once, so we don't have the costs of that. We create error the more complicated the processes are. Either the customer makes error or our agents make error, or we make it, bizarrely, the more complex the process is, it more open to abuse and fraud. So if we can make those processes easier and streamlined and then put the right mechanisms in place to prevent that, and then we don't have to spend a lot of money trying to recover it. So our ethos is, how do you become more effective? That in itself will then be would be cheaper,
more cost effective,
not a slash and burn approach.
Yeah. If you could name 2 or 3 things that would really make a difference to the substantive changes that we need in public services, what would those be?
One is, I think we don't actually know who our citizens are in a common way. I wouldn't know whether DWP knew me as Matt Briggs in the same way as HMRC would know me as Matt Briggs, or the health service would know me as Matt Briggs. But actually having a common form of identity across all of the public services, and therefore I'm a massive fan of One Login for Government. And through it, I think that is going to be a substantial change. And if you can then start to build things off of that, like that is one standard form of address, and all of those bits that would flow from that, I think that is going to be substantial. So there's a sort of technical approach that would actually solve some of that. Then there are 2, I think, which are much more cultural. I am a huge fan of how you work together, rather than reorganising yourself to try and force people to work together. I've been around for 34 years. I've seen so many attempts at reorganisation, and we've spent more time worrying about the reorganisation of ourselves than we have about the work for our customers and our citizens. So I'm like, don't reorganise, really think through and really put the customer in the centre and say who needs to join up around those things, but don't reorganise to do that. So I'm like, well, there's a fantastic colleague I've got called Barbara Bennett, who is the Chief Executive of the National Jobs and Careers Service. And she sits there and starts talking about, like, who's our relationship with people in prisons inside a community? Well, who's our relationships with a local authority? Who's the relationships that we've got there? There's a sort of cultural thing about building relationships and sustainable relationships. Don't worry about the organisational structures, just go and build relationships. And I think that's the big investment we've got to do as a civil service, is really think about who our relationships we want to have and who with. So that's probably the second. And then the third is the culture of an organisation. Who is it there to serve? Really, really think about who the customer is at the end of this. People that I get the most energy from going to actually work with are people who are either on the phones speaking to customers, or those. And actually, they're the people who have got all of the solutions. So in a year of, I think it's Innovation 2025, really, really think about where you get your solutions from. It's those people on the front line. Come and engage with them, and they'll make a big difference.
I'm going to ask you what your most thick of it moment in government was, because that's something we ask all senior leaders.
So the first was about 15 years ago, supporting a minister. We were going from our offices, which are in near St James's Park, to the Southwark Local Authority. We were late. So at that time, the ministers had drivers, and the driver said, I can get you there quicker. Decided to jump some red lights, go the wrong way down a one-way street, and then we got pulled over. The driver decided to argue with the policeman who pulled them over. The policeman decided to arrest the driver, and we were stuck near the hospital at St Thomas's trying to figure out how do we now get to the Southwark Local Authority, which was down there. And the minister in a mad panic going, I've not been south of the river, which was the sort of most memorable moment I can remember of him saying, what do I do on south of the river?
That's brilliant. Was there another one? Did you
Yeah,
mention another
well,
one?
I'm not too sure if I really want to say this one, but again, supporting, it was another minister at the time, had an appointment with a FTSE 100 chief executive who walked in, shook the minister's hand, was our Secretary of State at the time, and then walked out again. And the Secretary of State was, what happened there? Why did we not even speak?
It's very strange.
Had to ask, how did they shake your hand? Thankfully, the Secretary of State did not know what the signal was, but we then subsequently found out it was a Masonic handshake.
So was the FTSE 100 CEO trying to convey, we'll talk later in the club?
We're part of a gang
Yeah.
there, but obviously
We won't talk here, we'll talk later.
But obviously the Secretary of State was not part of the gang
well,
because
that
they
is
didn't
really-
realise what the handshake was.
It's very odd. Sounds like something from a novel.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask your advice for the younger generation. We were talking about pipeline of leaders earlier. What would you say to the leaders of tomorrow? What were your kind of top leadership tips?
Two main things. Take risk and be brave. Public services need people who are willing to go, I'm unsatisfied with the way that we do things and I want to do it differently. And if you're brave and you're willing to take risk, you will make a difference. And the ask for forgiveness rather than permission approach, do more of that as much as you possibly can. And that culture is not really set to do that, but really go for it. Because if you do, you'll make a difference and you can see a difference. That's probably the first bit of advice I would give. And then the second is be someone who other people want to be your friend. This is a fantastic place to work. I've built sustaining friendships over time there, but relationships are everything. They're either with our customers, with people who work on the front line of services, or with your colleagues who you're doing work with on a day-to-day basis. Relationships are everything. Be a nice person. It is not something that you should avoid saying, just be nice.
Yeah,
You will get a
leadership
lot
doesn't
done.
have to be a kind of austere, shouty, that kind of model.
Yeah.
Yes, you catch more flies with honey than with vinegar.
Absolutely.
Whatever the phrase is. This is a silly one, but I read that you're a fan of karaoke. I was talking to someone who actually works in the security services the other day, and I asked him he's a friend of mine, but I asked what his go-to karaoke song is, and I was incredibly disappointed because it was I Will Survive, and I said that is such a cliche, so I'm hoping your go-to song will be something slightly more interesting.
I'm a person of the time and different things that sort of come out, and there's a programme recently that's been on the BBC called This City Is Ours, but there's a song in it called The House of Bamboo, which is from 1954. And I love that song, and if there's a karaoke now and I'll be out there, I'm singing that.
Amazing. Well, I hope they have it. I hope they have it on the system. I understand you talked about the phases of this service modernisation at the DWP. I understand that as phase 1 comes to an end, that the MOJ is going to borrow you for a bit before you go back to lead phase 2. Is that right?
Absolutely. So I'm two things. One is I think we've set ourselves up really well with inside the programme, and therefore I don't feel too guilty about going off for 3 months. But I've also had a career of 34 years with inside DWP and its predecessors. So could I do what I do in a different place? So I've just tested myself a bit, but it's for 3 months, and it's to support the MOJ, who have an incredibly ambitious agenda coming up ahead of them. They've got real challenges within the court system. They've got challenges with probation and prisons. And I've offered to help in any way I can in supporting them through coming up with a plan for the next 2 to 3 years.
Well, we'll have to speak to you afterwards, and you can give us a very frank comparison of the two different cultures of the department.
What I've observed today, and admittedly I haven't started yet, is that they're pretty similar.
Right.
Actually, and I think there's something about scale of organisations that create that type of environment.
Yeah. And a lot of very dedicated public servants in both. Okay, well, Matt, thank you so much for your time. It was such a pleasure to chat to you.
Thank you.
And I hope you will stay in touch with It's Personal and join us again one day.
Absolutely, will do. Thank you so much for your time as well.
Thank you.
So I loved listening to Matt. It was such an emotional story of his career, and some of the things that he said to bring it to life just really struck a chord with me. Two things that stood out for me. One was his story about Brian, who says to him all the time, says to Matt, can't you just remember who I am? And it really brings the whole philosophy of personalised public service into sharp focus. Second point that I thought was really clear from Matt was around how AI could replace 48-page forms with natural conversation. And that's such an important subject, one we'll be looking into in future episodes.
Absolutely. For me, I thought that what he was saying about his dyslexia was really interesting, and how it makes him really visual, and that he likes drawing, and his dyslexia lends itself quite well to PowerPoint, which in turn means that he is really into systems thinking, which I must confess I have only learned about recently. And it is, for those who don't know, it's understanding how the interconnections within a system influence the system's behaviour. And so, I had never thought about dyslexia like that, but the way he uses it as a strength was really inspiring.
I trust you've enjoyed listening to Matt today. Make sure you add us to your podcast feed, and do get in touch with any thoughts, experiences, questions, feedback that you'd like to share.
And you can do that by dropping us a message at csw.editor@civilserviceworld.com, or by finding me or Jo on LinkedIn. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening to It's Personal, and see you next time for episode 3.